Hello, welcome to the second episode of the Root and Branch Media Fellowship monthly seminar, where we discuss media and we discuss issues of the day in the context of real interpretation and truth according to Torah as we understand it. My name is Mordechai Sones, news director of Jewish Home News and Global Eyewitness News. I'm joined by my co-hosts Tzvi and Frank Zelenko. Hi everyone, and happy new month, Chodesh Tov, the month of ER. We were getting ready to enter the program and speaking about a few various things. We could talk about the fact that it's Victory in Europe Day this week, and the fact that it was Holocaust Remembrance Day. That there is an imminent perhaps decision on what's going to happen in Gaza, but there are many things to be discussed here. And I saw, looking at today's Torah reading, those who read they study the daily portion according to the weekly parsha, so that on Sundays you learn the first reading and on Mondays the second, etc. So it turns out that today's reading teaches us about the practice of offering one's child to Molech. It was a form of idol worship in ancient times, whereby a parent would turn his child over to some kind of an expert, who at the time was called a priest, and that priest would bring the child between two fires on each side. I've seen various interpretations of what the meaning of the ceremony was, what this idol worship was. As it was practiced then, it is not practiced today. But on the other hand, we know that there is no such thing as a lesson in Torah that doesn't have relevance, eternal relevance and high relevance to all of us. And so we really need to look what the spirit of the prohibition is, what's happening in the parsha, and what God is telling us. And we see a very interesting thing, that there's a difference with this particular sin and all other capital sins, and that in all other capital crimes in the Torah, one must give warning and bring the offender or the alleged offender to Beis Din in order to judge and adjudicate that crime. Whereas with this crime, it says specifically that as long as the person is about to do the Aveira, he's about to give his child to one of the priests of Molech, so the nation itself is enjoined to stone the person and to kill him without that due process. And the Torah even goes further, and it says, "V'im halem ya'alimu am haaretz eseinehem min ha'isha," and if the nation decides to ignore this man, besito mizara lemolech, and his giving of his seed to Molech, lebilti hamisoisai, and the nation decides that they're going to ignore what he's doing and not kill him, v'samti ani es panai ba'ishahu, so then I, God says, I will turn my face to that man and his family, and I will cut him off, and all those who turn away from this person and turn them to Molech within their nation. So there are a few very, very basic questions here. What is the difference between this sin and other capital sins that it's so urgent that the nation is enjoined to take a vigilante action and go and kill somebody who does such a thing? What's so bad about it? Yes.
Could it be that he's about to burn a child? Could that be it? That seems pretty bad.
Well, it could be it, but yes, but still, it's a different thing, and it's a different union of capital punishment. Is there no other way to stop him? The whole nation has to go and kill him. Why don't they just stop him? Why isn't it enough? I mean, it says here that the person has to be burned out of the nation, and not only that, but him and his whole family. What is this? We thought that the whole difference between Judaism and other creeds is that other creeds preach that somebody else dies for one's sins, and we Jews don't say that. One doesn't die for somebody else's sins. And so why now are we being told that in this particular sin the whole family dies? And Rashi comes and he explains to us. Rashi says it's because he gives a very, very interesting example. He says when there's one moiches in the family, when there's one tax collector in the family, so all the rest of them are going to cover for him. In other words, if there's corruption somewhere, So everybody else is going to cover for that corruption, and that's why the family really isn't innocent, and that's why they also are caught in this terrible sin. But it goes even further than that. It says if they will ignore it, Rashi says if they decide to ignore one thing, in the end they're going to ignore lots of things. As if you let things pass, if you say, well, I thought it was just a regular missile from Gaza, and so I decided to ignore it, and then I didn't know that it was a big attack. Or if you say, well, it isn't so bad because it's just a face mask, and I know that it isn't, I know that it's not necessary, and I know that they're giving people fines, and cops are beating the crap out of people on the streets because they're not wearing face masks. But I can deal with it. Or well, it says if they ignore one thing, in the end they're going to ignore lots of things. If the little Bezdin, if the small Sanhedrin ignores what's going on, in the end, the great Sanhedrin is going to ignore what's going on. So it turns out that the corruption in the nation that reaches the highest levels of leadership starts on the lowest levels of the nation, even before it gets up to the Bezdin. Everybody needs to know what's right and wrong for themselves. And when they see governments doing horrible, despicable things, betraying their nation and everything, rather than shaking our heads and talking about what morons they are, how wicked they are, how bad they are, we have to understand that evil is not a thing that we're taught in the Hollywood movies, where somebody who's evil has to look ugly with warts on his nose and look like a witch. No, many times, when somebody who wasn't necessarily raised in a Torah background might come to believe the lie that beauty equals truth. But beauty does not necessarily equal truth. That's a Greek interpretation of how to look at the world. Beauty can be very, very nice, but it doesn't necessarily equal truth. And sometimes the most evil and wicked people are the ones who look the best, and not the ones who look the worst. And if we're raised thinking that evil has some kind of a satanic, despicable face, and our leaders must be Satanists, they must be reptilians, they must be something out of this world. No, it's enough for them to be just as evil as we. I'm speaking to myself, and I'm not giving anybody musar, but we have to work on ourselves, because these little things that we have to work on, when they put people like us into big situations where they're in charge of millions of lives, so then you don't have to be a big, wicked, evil genius. You don't have to be a Darth Vader, and you don't have to be Satan himself. All you have to be is a regular guy who's in a position where the responsibility is too great for his moral muscles. And these are things that every single one of us, the lesson from what it says in the parsha from today, is that it starts with the nation. And if we're going to ignore little things, and we're going to end up ignoring big things, then we have these horrible tragedies that come on us. Anyway, that was something that I thought really has high relevance to everything that's happening in the world today, everything that's happening in current events. I mean, what we need is a drastic change in the way that we look at government, and the way that we relate to our elected representatives and officials. And there's a lot to be said for that. But if anybody has something to say, I'm gonna take my break now.
Well, Mordechai,
I got something to say. Let me jump in front of Greg, just to be a jerk. What you're reminding me of reminds me a lot about some thoughts I had about, if I'm saying it wrong, Ben Sarah Mar, the wayward son, right? We in the Torah, and anybody who's familiar with the Hebrew scripture is paying attention. There is this case of a son who, before his 13th birthday, he has to do these particularly strange things, which it says that he could be killed for, right? If he steals, if anybody knows, if he steals money from his parents or his father, from the purse, from the wallet of his father, and then goes and takes this and uses that money to buy wine and meat. Is that correct? Is that what he has to do?
It has to be a certain age, but there's a 6-month period that he has in order to hit this thing. He has to steal a certain amount of money, buy a certain amount of wine and meat, and consume it within a certain amount of time in bad company with bad friends. When he does all that, then yes,
this is a very specific. It's not vague. It's very specific. Like you have to deliberately want to do this in order to qualify for this kind of offense. It's like you have to find out about it and be like, I want to do the worst thing I could possibly do, and then find out the exact ritual to perform. And so and then the parents are supposed to there's the parents bring the child to be killed, right? Takes to the court to be killed. So really, the Torah is describing an absolutely inconceivable set of circumstances that have never happened before and never will. So why does it bother talking about it? Because it's saying that the parents are killing this child. Because how much neglect did they have to? How long has this child been neglected to the point where he can get to the point to do these specific things? It just goes to show you that this didn't start the moment the kid started doing all that. It started with the parents who, I don't know, they never talked to him. They went to Club Med and left the kid, in boarding school. I don't know what's going on, but it's the same idea as to what you're talking about. When somebody from your family goes and brings his kid into the fires of Moloch, right? How much neglect have you been giving this relative? Like,
that's it.
This didn't come out of nowhere. You guys have been neglecting this for what, a couple of decades? So that's primarily the reason. You know what I mean? So I think that's just a little bit more detail to what
Torah backs up what you're saying. I mean, the place in the Parsha of Ben Sora Moira and Parshas Kiseitse comes after a soldier goes out in war and sees a foreign woman who he must have, and so he takes her. Then after that, the next parsha talks about the hated wife. If a man has a wife he loves and a wife he hates, and the firstborn son is to the wife who he hates, he can't deprive that firstborn son of his inheritance. And then after that, it talks about this Ben Sarah Moira to tell you that if you have a son in this, if you take a woman in this circumstance, and then she is the hated wife, in the end you're going to bring a wayward child. Not only that, but in this week's parsha, I saw in the Netziv in the Hamek Dover that it asks, why is it that this commandment about regarding offering one's child to Molech comes in between the commandment of weights and measures, which is yesterday's, and tomorrow's, which is about certain sexual immorality sins and things like that. And he says that there's a difference between both of those types of sins. Somebody whose passions lead him to do wrongdoing in arayah, sexual immorality, doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't have faith in Hashem. It's just that he couldn't help himself. It's something that's called l'te'avan. Whereas the sinner who sins with weights and measures, it's a very cold, calculated thing, and it shows that he has no faith in God because he thinks that God can't give him the money and he's got to get it through ill-gotten ways. But offering your child to Molech has elements of both, and that's why it's in between both of those. Because offering one's child to Molech, they believed that they were going to get parnasa from it. They believed that if they do this, they're going to placate some god that they don't really believe in anyway. It was more of an act of throwing off fear of heaven and going and deciding to do something else. And for that, it was like it was the kind of sin that has like the worst of both worlds, the worst of both types of averas. And there again, so we see that again, what were the parents doing and what were they running after? What was important to them? And why did they have the kid in the first place? I mean, don't get me started on that one. We could talk another, we're going to have to end this night sometime. So maybe we'll dedicate another whole program to it. Yeah.
It's funny you guys are talking about neglect, and Mordechai and I were just kind of parsing out what we're going to speak about today before we got here. And one of the things was I was mentioning that and Frank left. Okay, there he is. You talk to soldiers and who are reservists. Let's say I have some friends who are reservists, and you bring up to them things like just simple stuff, 2 + 2, like why didn't the army show up for 7 hours? Why did the government send you guys to the border for make you wait for 3 weeks? Aren't you guys getting antsy? Yeah, they say, yeah, we were antsy. And I'm like, don't you think there's something a little bit odd And the answer you usually get from these guys, these very good guys who are, I consider them tzaddikim, but they say, what you're saying is, what you're asking me is above my pay grade. And I I don't understand. I don't understand their response. I don't understand. I literally told this one guy, I'm like, what? It's above your pay grade to think? No, he's like, well, I'm a soldier and they're politicians. And I'm like, sure, but you vote, right? And there's reasons you vote for, I don't know, this guy versus this guy, right? Why? Because you use your brain and your mind to think about, okay, what policy would this guy, you know, employ, install versus that guy, right? As if there's any difference. But, let's just assume that there is, right? So if you're a citizen of the country and you vote a certain way and you have certain values, you have certain, and I'm not, at this point, I'm not even talking about like left wing or right wing. I'm just talking about just basic common sense. Someone's attacking your country and this supposedly mighty army or the supposedly mighty technology that where if a caterpillar passes gas, we know for sure. So then and you're not asking the question, and Mordechai gave me the answer basically, well, a lot of people in Israel have been kind of conditioned to just not ask certain questions or just to kind of like believe that the government is basically taking care of it and they are on top of it, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. At best, I was just recently in Israel and I spoke to some family friends and they told me, well, they are investigating now and they did fire some people and a couple of heads did roll. And I said, I hope you guys understand. There's two things. First of all, the heads that rolled, these are just, they're just making kind of an example. They're just throwing people a bone here. Yeah, it's a fall guy. The second aspect is, even if you fire people, you have an obligation to tell the public what the hell happened. So now the answer is, when I go further and ask and escalate the discussion to that level, they say, well, now is not the time. I said,
Rick.
when? Just 1 second. I said, when will be the time? Tell me, designate a time. Write it down on a piece of paper. When you tell me what the time is, will be for the moment we can talk about this. We can investigate it. I will be there and we'll talk about it. Tell me what the time is.
Okay.
Calendar, date, and clock.
I want to shorten this whole concept for a second, because I've had the same conversation that you're having, and and basically here's what I say all the stuff that's FUBAR, the Israeli government's FUBAR, okay,
Yeah.
and effed up beyond all recognition. And when you talk to Israeli about this, there's a beseder, which means if you keep bothering me about this, I have to storm the Bastille. Did I say that right? Storm the Bastille, right? And I don't. And so that's very that's very extreme. That's probably be inconvenient for my future plans with my family and my career. So you're pushing my mind to the point where the only way to address what you're complaining about is for us to just literally kill the entire political class of Israel and then reform the government. So that's why it's difficult to have this conversation, because what we have to do about it is so extreme. It's so difficult.
Well,
Frank,
there still are.
I was just gonna say, Frank, the thing with, to be honest with you, man, have you been seeing what was going on right before October 7th?
Yeah, I saw it.
Okay, so those people, I know some of them personally, these fruitcakes in Tel Aviv, and I'm not talking about their sexual orientation. These people work at startups. They're very, very, people think these people don't have jobs. Some of them don't, but a lot of them do. They're very busy people. They're very busy people. They're very intelligent people. They took off from their jobs at their startups that have venture capital firms that fund them, that need them to do work. They have a timeline of when they're supposed to produce. They took off because they believe in whatever cause that, we think it's stupid, but they really believe in that cause. And as you could see, and some of them were funded and some of them were not funded. Some of them went on their own volition, on their own money, right? And it's not that difficult, as you could clearly see. So if these idiots can do it, we sure could do it, and probably even better if we believe in something.
Well,
Just like people who are sitting, the three of us, like people like us, believe in the Torah and are willing to do seemingly, crazy things and give up certain, seemingly things that people are like, how can you give this up, right? Even for a week or for the rest of your life, or stop eating this and stop doing that, and you have to go do this and you have to go pray here and you have to go learn that. That's crazy, right? The same enthusiasm we have for the Torah and for Hashem, right? I'm not calling myself a tzaddik. I mean, it's not that difficult. If you believe in something and you think that the government is literally, I know a lot of people who say the same things that we're saying. The government is like this. The government.
We don't have a single Rabbi Akiva to support us in this. We don't have a single Rabbi Akiva to support this, our Bar Kochba. Not one. Not a single one in the whole nation. They have a million Rabbi Akivas on their side, who are supporting them and pushing them with money and support, and you don't have that. That's why we need one.
We don't have it, but it's also a different time. Every human being has a different scale of influence than what they used to have back then, and that everybody has a greater measure of informational power that they can wield if they know that they have the power and if they're smart enough to know how to wield it. I mean, if you have such intelligent people who are businessmen and they're responsible and they can be either so clueless about their own government and how they're betraying them, or they could be on totally the wrong side of the argument. All of it is because of how their minds were nourished by the media. It started in school and it just continues, and they're offered a view of reality which they would no sooner question than hundreds of years ago people would question cosmology or Christianity or whatever the thing was. They just don't question it, and if somebody, it's in Hebrew we say that wisdom is called chachma, and chachma are the letters koachma, the ability to ask what, to look at a thing and clear your mind of your preconceived notions and just ask what is going on. Well, the 7.5, 8 hours that they didn't show up, what? If somebody is full of an ideology that precludes his asking certain questions because they're heretical questions to a certain ideology or worldview or country or government or party or rabbi or anything, but he's being intellectually dishonest on purpose, that's a sin. Death will result from that. It may result in short term, it may result for the person's family, but it's a decision the person makes. And I've said this before on this program, and maybe certain things have to be repeated over and over again, but what we put into our head is just as much of a responsibility what we put into our bodies in terms of the food and the nutrition, nourishment, whether we're talking about kashrus, whether we're talking about health. And it's a sin to put things in that are going to mess you up or lead you astray, and that's what everybody does when he consumes mainstream media, including Jewish mainstream media, including and especially.
Mordechai, Frank sent me something yesterday from Yeshiva World News, because he gets the WhatsApp updates from them. I was actually trying to tell him,
sorry to hear that.
Before that, to switch maybe to this guy Alan Silver or whatever, the most updated information and whatever. But so yesterday he sends me something about the amount of, there was something they wrote. I don't know. I'm assuming it was a typo.
They wrote 500,000 Russian soldiers killed during the war. So that's what they said.
I don't know if they were talking about World War II and in commemoration.
No, they're talking about this conflict with Ukraine. That's what they said.
Yeah.
How many?
500,000.
500,000 Russian soldiers.
I don't think that's the
case. They don't have 500,000 Russian men in existence.
Yeah.
So more.
No, they're.
They never. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the population in Russia has always been sparse, especially among the men, and especially the healthy men. So it's such a ridiculous. You could say it's a typo, but I've seen this claim by by the anti-Putin media. Right? Yeah. Again, I'm not the pro-Putin media, but the anti-Putin media is trying to say that Russia is getting decimated. Almost like what Saddam Hussein said when Americans were destroying the entire country, and they said, "Oh, we're winning. We're drowning them in their own blood." It's just ridiculous propaganda. And Yeshiva World News, I kind of started to look at them a little bit suspiciously when they turned on my brother, almost instantly. when COVID started. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, I have a very unique perspective.
Well, Frank, I mean, I'm looking
Yes.
right now. It's actually it does. If you go like just let's say Wikipedia, not that it's a great source, it's actually 52,000 Russian soldiers. This is as of last week. So it could be a typo, but the thing is, even if it's a typo, dude, that's a big typo. You know what I mean? If you're somebody who's
Well,
proofreading over there, like maybe,
typos are bad,
yeah.
but they can be forgiven. That's not the
Sure,
worst thing. That's
sure,
not what's worse. What's worse
sure.
is that they're a mainstream media outlet who passively passes on government disinformation, and they disguise themselves as religious, so that if they receive a press release which says something which is heretical, let's say there's a press release that it makes reference to something 5 million years ago, so they say no, we can't have that, and they just change it, and now the article is kosher, and they don't realize that the whole thing is treif, the entire thing. And so what they're being steered towards, obviously, if you look at the coverage, and not just attacking that site, it's all of the mainstream sites, they just regurgitate what they receive, the agenda that's set by the mainstream so-called elite outlets, and they put a Jewish twist on it, and they add some diversionary other things that are Jewish to give it an ethnic Jewish flavor, and give a lot of cover to Rabbanim and say Zatzal, and now it's a Jewish site. You take an unclean beast and put a strimal and kapata on it, and there you have it. But they're not providing people the context and the history and the background of the news that they need to understand what juxtapositions are happening here between events, and reminding people what happened. What did this same politician say 3 years ago? Well, I was reviewing some of my own newscasts recently, and I came across one from March of 2019, when the then IDF chief of staff was talking about how Iran was harassing Israel with missiles through Gaza in order to mess up our elections, and all the blah 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 and stuff that they talk about now. There was a briefing given by some of today's personalities to then Trump administration officials who were visiting, and they were telling them about the tunnels, and they knew all about it, and they were warning them, and and asking for more money from the United States. But it's not as though they didn't know about the threats, and a news organization's job should be to point these things out to people and be an instrument of memory and not forgetfulness. And if we deliberately or consciously consume news content from sites that help us to forget and specialize in not asking the tough questions, so then we're at fault. We have to stop it, and we have to start using our own judgment in the information that we put in, and believing our own eyes and ears and not what some politician tells us. The memory is an extremely, extremely important thing in Judaism, and it's extremely important thing to forget in other creeds. We don't have any songs that say yesterday's gone, yesterday's gone. We have days of remembrance, and there are certain things we always have to remember. Yeah.
Mordechai, question for you. Are you going to make an app for your news site? I'm going to explain. I need this information for my own selfish reasons, because I recently got rid of everything on my phone. Everything. All the apps. I only have email and WhatsApp. That's it. Nothing else. I also have an 80s music app. That's just kind of like whatever. But that's it. Nothing else. No social media, no news, no internet, nothing. Okay? And I do need, minor updates, just the most important things that are going on. Like, for instance, what's a big story? Biden didn't send the bombs or whatever, right? So I need something like that, and I need,
Right.
I don't know anybody but you that I would trust. I wouldn't read anybody else's app, basically.
Well, I appreciate that. Let me tell you, we do have a feature. We do not have an app yet, but we do have an ability to subscribe to newsletters, and that's the way you'll be able to get things in the email. We'll when we're able to get a web developer who can build us the apps, and we will do it. We can't. In the past, there were Apple apps, and and Google Store apps, which had some extremely restrictive rules on what your content is, and we were not willing to play the game of censoring every reference to COVID in order to get their app. But if there's a way that we can have an app and get around those things and have our own app, it's something that's in the future. It's a plan. But I appreciate the vote of confidence. We need to be able to hire a very, very serious and big team to make this a news organization that it needs to be. So far, we're still waiting. We're working on it, and when the day comes, there are big things that we want to do. Sure.
That's fine. But now that you mentioned newsletter, I think I'm okay with a newsletter. Like that would be just fine for me, for my purposes.
All right, great. And I realize now that we're talking that there's still a document that I need to give you that we discussed last time, but I have it written for myself here, so it's not forgotten.
So do we have any time left? I know I came late.
Yeah, no, we have plenty of time because
I just wanted to say
Hmm.
I'm extremely grateful if it's true that Biden didn't send the bombs. It's a very important symbolic step for Israel to immediately begin its own arms industry, as it should have decades ago. It could have easily and should have. And the thought of them not stockpiling the munitions and the armaments that they have already gotten is inconceivable. So it's not really like it's something to worry about. So imagine, let's play a game. And I wish this game would spread in Israel, especially. He goes, if the government actually cared about us, what would they do? Like if they asked that question. So so the answer is, in this case, well, they would immediately suspend all this whole aid nonsense with the United States and begin immediately creating their own military industrial complex, but a good one, not an evil one, and problem solved. But since the leadership, unfortunately, the reality is the leadership, the political class of Israel, they don't want to achieve victory. They don't want to achieve security. They don't want, because they're not the leadership of the Jews in Israel. They are the liaisons, the representatives of the military-industrial complex of the United States and associates.
Yep. Well, I'll tell you what they would do if they cared. But first of all, we have to remember that care is not a quantifiable value. But we know that the world leaders, politicians who hang out at Bohemian Grove, and they cremate likeness of Molech, the Molech owl, and they call it cremation of care because these people cultivate lack of caring. Some people call it Satanism and satanic. If that's what you want to call it, what is it? What really are they doing? What they're doing is they're making themselves able to not care and to abandon innocents to death. But if our government really cared, if the Prime Minister of Israel really cared about us, what he would do is he would get on the television, he would resign his job publicly and tell everybody what the pressures are that are coming to bear on him, what he's being made to do by the United States, and he, as someone who cares about his nation, will not carry it out, and therefore I hand in my resignation right now. My power is less important. Me continuing in power is less important than the survival of the Jewish nation. Because they do not do that, that shows that they don't care.
That is what you just said that Netanyahu has to do. I agree, but there's a couple of steps he needs to take before he even does that. Okay. And by the way, care is in my opinion, is a quantifiable measure in the sense that they have to. The leader, if he cared about his nation, would number one ensure physical security and do whatever is necessary for the physical security of his population. That's number one. Number two, promote the economic growth of his own citizens above everybody else. Okay, those are the two things of caring about. And also, if you're a Jewish leader, you have to promote the study of Torah, not force it, not coerce it, but promote cultural campaigns, which are very common in the world, to for people to go and to study Torah, especially obviously Jewish people. Okay, so that is quantifiable. But before he resigns and before he says everything that you just said, he has to find the generals in Israel who will act to secure the security to secure the nation, to take every military step necessary to secure the safety, the physical safety of the citizens right now. If that means taking over entire, territories, then whatever it is, just get out of the way and let the generals who are willing to act do what they do, and let Israel be run by the military.
It means the junior officers corps has to replace the IDF leadership. The entire leadership has to go because they're tainted and because they got to where they are for a certain very specific reason. That's also a whole topic for another talk. But yeah.
Did you ever watch Superman? You ever watch Superman, the original Superman? You ever see it?
What do you mean? Way back, yeah. But
Marlon Brando, right, and Christopher Reeve, right? Like he was.
yes, oh yes.
From the beginning of the movie, they have these, there's Krypton, you have the whole society, and then you have these criminals that are on trial. Once they're convicted, they're stuffed into this kind of like mirror, this kind of like two-dimensional kind of like window pane, right? And they're launched off into the cosmos, and they're stuck in that jail for all eternity. So the entire political class of Israel, literally no one, not a single person, and the entire top brass of the IDF, which is part of the political class, need to be stuffed into that thing and just, just launched away or dropped in the middle of the ocean. I mean, that's the only way it's going to be, because these people are very, very entrenched, and they're extremely evil. And I'm not saying that it's difficult for a person like me to say what I'm saying, but it became extremely clear during COVID, because I was kind of on the sidelines, and I witnessed certain things that most people couldn't possibly. I just had a perspective. I saw what my brother was talking to these people, not just in the Israeli government, but in many governments. But in the Israeli government, these people are evil, and they need to be removed from our nation. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't tshuva, this and that.
Well, again,
Israel, no.
We got to stop voting for them, and we got to stop letting them scare us into voting for them because the other guy is worse. Oh, you got to vote for him because you don't want him to get in, do you? Oh no, that's the cycle that they have us. Yeah.
So here's my question. I have a lot of people, mostly friends and family members, telling me, Tzvi, and this is not a joke, and I'm not saying this to prop myself up or anything. I have a few people say, Tzvi, so when are you running for Knesset? And I say to them, do you have any idea? And I use a certain word that I'm not going to use on this program, starting with an S and ending with a G, and the last part of the word is bag. Do you know what kind of a something bag you have to be in order to be in that building, in order to sit in a chair inside that building? And so now they're coming and telling me, well, what about Jonathan Pollard? He's not of that style, of that ilk. And I said, yeah. And they've been asking him and asking him and asking him. And he's been saying no and saying no. And now he finally...
Because you get Mayor Kahana the moment you get in there.
Sure.
That's what happened.
Well,
that's the last normal person we had in there.
Just one sec, Frank. So you're right. But I'm saying that, I guess it's Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Not that I'm fans of either, but they pestered him long enough. And then Pollard now said, I feel like it's a thing where I can't say no because it's almost like I have an obligation now, and I know what I'm getting, what I would be getting myself into. I know what's in that building. I know who's there, and I just don't have a choice. Like it's almost like George Washington. He didn't want. I mean, Lahavdil. He didn't want to be the president. He specifically because he didn't want America to be like a monarchy, but they literally forced him. And he ended up being he was the only reluctant president America ever had. Ever since
actually Trump, in my opinion, he's been being pressured to run for office.
Listen, Trump ran a few times. He had exploratory campaigns, and was it early 2000s, late 90s. He ultimately wanted to listen. Whatever.
I in my opinion, I don't agree with
that.
I don't think everyone.
They won't allow Trump to win without burning America's cities.
That's a different story. But my point is that we keep talking about putting different people in that building, but it seems to me that I remember who I was talking to yesterday about this. That basically, I think it was me, Frank and I were talking about this. That it's almost like Hashem now has designated Mashiach to be an actual leader. The only actual leader that can be is actually Mashiach, meaning not even Bibi, who supposedly, allegedly, the Lubavitcher Rebbe told him that you're going to be the guy to hand him the keys. But even if that's the case, he could be the guy who doesn't do what he's supposed to do, and then Mashiach comes and says, "Okay, I'll take it from here, man. Since you can't handle this, give me the keys, and I'll take it from him."
There's a
Because-
famous in the
Yeah.
Yalkut Shimoni that Rabbi Kessin mentions all the time, and many Chabad Rabbanim mention all the time. And I'm just paraphrasing. Mordechai, you're definitely more familiar.
I'll bring it.
You know what you want to talk about. Perfect. You couldn't ask for a better co-host. Oh man.
Yalkut Shimoni, but go ahead.
So
Paraphrase away.
it's the one that it says that the Jews, they won't know, there will be no leadership, and they'll run this way and then they'll run that way, and then they'll say we don't know which way to go, and that's when there's going to be a bat kol, and Hashem will say everything I did for you, and don't worry. And it's very oddly worded. I mean, obviously it's a midrash, so every little detail. Yeah. Okay.
It's in Yalkut Shimoni, Yeshaya Nuntes Samech. It's actually Samech. Found on page 808 of the. Something strange happened with the screen just now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. It starts like this. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak said, Shana Shemelech HaMashiach Nigla Boy, in the year that the king Mashiach is revealed in it, Kol Malchei Umas Ha'olam Izgarim Zeh all the kings of the nations of the world are starting up with each other, are provoking one another. Melech Paras Mizgar Melech Aravi, the king of Persia, what is today called Iran, is provoking the king of Arabia. The Holech Melech Aravi LaAram, the king of Arabia goes to Aram, which may be NATO, maybe the United States, but they go to one of the world powers, Litoletza, to get from them advice, mayhem from them. The Choizer Melech Paras Umachribis Koiloilam, the king of Persia, of Iran, comes back and destroys the entire world. The Kol Umasoilam Misrashim Umisbalim, and all the nations of the world are making noise, and they're confused and are thrown into great turmoil. The Noiflim al Pneim, they fall on their faces. The Achzoi Sam Tsirim Kitsiri Oleda, and they grip them contractions like a woman in birth. The Yisrael Misrashim Umisbalim. And the Jewish people are also screaming and getting all confused and terrified, and saying, where are we going to go? Where are we going to come? Where are we going to go? What are we going to do? And then God says to them, Bni, my sons, Al tisyaru, don't be afraid. Everything that I did, I only did for you. What are you afraid for? Al tiro, don't fear. The time for your geula has arrived. And the last geula is not like the first geula in Mitzrayim. In the first geula, you still had trouble. You still had subjugation to different nations after it. But in this last geula, in this last redemption, you do not have trouble. You do not have destruction, and you don't have subjugations to nations after it. So the Medrash doesn't need Benjamin Netanyahu, and it doesn't need Putin, and it doesn't need Biden. The Medrash has existed for 3,000 years, 2,800. I'm not sure. If someone can correct me, years, before these people were a twinkle in anyone's eye, and the Torah, the words of the Torah are not lahavdil like the words of yesterday's newspaper that you can wrap a fish in. They're words that are fitting to be repeated and to be saved because they're true and they will remain true forever. And how did they know that there was going to be a political situation where these are going to be dominant players on the world scene, and that Iran is going to be in a position big enough to be able to affect the entire world? Who could have seen that thousands of years ago, and who could have known? But we know. And the message is not to be afraid. And if the message is not to be afraid, so then it's a sin to go and do anything, is going to make you afraid, and therefore don't tune into mainstream news.
That's the overall message. But when me and Greg started having these like recorded conversations, this podcast, it started on the basis of this idea that when COVID hit, we realized just after COVID and going into the election in the United States between Trump and Biden, when Biden got elected, we realized there was absolutely no leadership in America. He's not a legitimate president. There's no real leadership. And Israel was going on 5 elections, and they couldn't find any leader, and they still don't have a leader, because I think people are hopefully people have learned what a leader is and what he's supposed to do, and they can recognize when he doesn't exist. Like Netanyahu poisoned this entire nation. He poisoned them. He didn't have to, and he did it. Okay, Biden is not the real president. There is no leadership in the world. There's an absolute vacuum. And so obviously I think this is the first time in history that the world has been in this condition. And then everything else that the Midrash is talking about is literally manifesting before our eyes. So, it's kind of hard.
Glorious. Herrlich, as they say in German.
Mordechai,
yes.
And Frank also, it's very, when I talk about these things with friends and family, it's very difficult for me to, meaning like they it's not that they think I'm crazy, it's that they see what's going on, but a lot of friends and family say that it's a passing thing. And I'm trying to tell them, listen, you guys need to understand that I'm coming at this from a Torah perspective, and I'm coming at this not only a Torah perspective, but with what's called a Mashiach lens, right? So it's not just like your regular run-of-the-mill Jewish history timeline kind of situation where it's like, okay, here comes the latest anti-Semitic entity. In this case, it's not even a government. It's just like, I mean, there are people in the government, but it's not like, I'm not worried as much as like Biden and Obama and all that stuff. I'm not worried like that the American government is going to round me up and put me into camps. What I am worried about is, again, we're talking about you mentioned the exile of Ishmael, right? And Chazal, it was a weird thing for Chazal to say this 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, right? Because these guys were nobody, walking around with camels. Not Chazal. I'm talking about the people we're dealing with today. So, and now they're all over the place, and you can't help but if you're tapped into Torah, you can't help but notice this. Like, wow, like this is literally the last galut, the last exile. But the scary part to me is that there's a lot of people who are, so to speak, Shomer Shabbat and so to speak, Orthodox, who learn more Torah than I ever could, and pray 3 times a day, who are not seeing that from this lens. Like I was just talking to a friend today who moved back to the States from Israel recently. The person lives in actually the state where Frank lives in, a place closer to Frank, and they were saying like, it's hard for me to hear, because I was mentioning how I went to the Aliyah conference in Israel and how everybody's saying that it's time for people to leave, whether it's tomorrow, whether it's next week, whether it's in a year. Some people have different opinions, but the person basically told me, man, they said I made Aliyah and I wasn't prepared when I made Aliyah for, I didn't really have this the support system when I made Aliyah, and it was very difficult for me to live in Israel, the typical, the Parnasa thing and all these things. And, it's difficult for me to hear now that I'm back in Miami, let's say, that it's time for me to leave and I have to go back to Israel, where I just came from, where I just had a really, really, really tough time by myself. And I said, listen, this is a Torah Jew, like a serious Torah Jew. A person also sees things from the lens of, what's going on in Mashiach. But at the same time, they're kind of like, they even brought up the whole thing of like that there are some Orthodox Jews that say we can't leave until Mashiach comes. And I said, yeah, those people, their grandparents who were rabbis, said the same thing in Europe, and look what happened. They said the same thing. They said, you cannot leave. We can't go to Israel until, even though their relatives were in Israel. Now, what we call the Yerushalmis, the Orthodox Jews in Mea Shearim were already there. And then their cousins in Europe said they can't,
Yeah, I think we got to break out our old vintage videos of Dr. Zev and see the way he would say things right to people in their face. If somebody says to you, now is not the time, or if somebody says to you all these, you got to say to them, listen, man, you're just making excuses. You just don't want to think about it. You're just a coward. Don't tell me now is not the time, and don't tell me this, that, and the other thing. If you want to say it's hard, okay, it's hard, but this is, let's be intellectually honest first, and then, people don't want to name a thing. People don't want to give it a name because it's too terrifying, so they don't want to think about it. They don't want to discuss it. But one of the Dr. Zev, he wouldn't tolerate that. He would say a thing right in the face, and he would say, he wouldn't try to soften the truth with euphemism or any of that. And I think that's a good example. Like, it's a good thing to watch the way he used to talk and emulate him a
Mordechai,
little bit.
can I just break this
Well,
down?
you
What
know,
you're
in
saying,
case-
Frank, just one second. I want to say just one quick, super quick thing. I'm sorry. I like, what I like in these situations too, and you said like people don't want to like stare things in the face. People are, it's too scary. For me, it's always been too scary not to say things. Like I'm the kind of person, like, I find myself. You ever find yourself just like in an event or something, or you're sitting in like a dinner party or some kind of event, and like you see something going on, like somebody's doing something really weird or saying something really off, or a few people are doing. Let's say there's 10 people, like 2 people are doing like just weird stuff, and no one's
Something
saying,
wrong is going on.
no, something is off, and no one's saying anything for like a few minutes at a time, and then you're sitting there like wondering, am I going insane? And then one other person kind of like mentions something, but he doesn't want to say anything, and then
A little
finally,
twitch.
the what?
A little twitch. Somebody has to reveal a little twitch for
A little
somebody
twitch.
else to
Yeah,
speak up.
it's like a cue, and then I'm usually the guy that pipes up, and then what happens? It's like a Larry David situation where I'm the what now,
Yeah.
the socially, the guy that needs to be kicked out of the party. But I'm just like,
I
guys,
love being
like,
that guy.
yeah,
I love
listen,
being that guy.
listen. I also sometimes love it, but like, dude, it just seems like
Right,
that's where we're at. We're at a dinner party, no one wants to say anything.
Right. Mordechai said
Yeah.
something about my brother. I need to comment on it quickly.
Please.
Because people could
Yeah.
say, okay, your Dr. Zelenko was, he was, he did get in people's faces, and he didn't use euphemisms, and he didn't let people just kind of, so why didn't he move to Israel? And I'll tell you why, and it's the same reason I'm not in Israel. Because we're not going to Israel without our dumb loved ones who we can't drag away from here. That's why. Okay? I'm not going there. I know I need to be there. I'm not going there without my parents, without my wife and child, without my other loved ones. Okay? That's why.
But here's my question,
Yep.
Frank. Frank, and forgive me for asking this question, because I like your parents very much, and your generally your
Just
family.
ask the question.
What do they see the same things going on that we see? And if so, what conclusions do they draw, and what is the end game in their mind, and what do they think that they're supposed to do anything, or what's?
No, my parents, like many parents, are doing their best not to see as much as possible.
I mean, my parents see it, but their answer is, well, if only we just, like I said, if only we just elect Trump, this whole thing will be over.
Greg, we need a supernatural.
Oh boy.
We need a supernatural savior. Okay,
Yeah.
that's.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's my opinion. Okay, I've in my marriage alone, I've had to move 11 times. I need Mashiach to literally rip up the house that I'm renting, the condo that I'm renting, and just transplant it, because the thought of having to move again
I
is
hear you.
soul crushing. It's very,
Yeah.
very difficult. It's hard. This is not an easy thing. People are,
I know.
look, I do agree with Mordechai. You got to be at least honest about it. You got to say, I'm lazy, I'm scared, and I don't want to leave my family behind, but I know I got to be there. I think that's a good step for most people. You know what I mean? Like, instead of saying it's not the right time, blah, 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 it's always the right time. If you have an opportunity to live in Israel, you're supposed to go there, right? Right?
Yeah. Frank, it's funny you say 11.
It's
11
obvious.
times. I feel like Hashem has been preparing you at least for moving, but not that you are fond of.
Well, maybe Hashem
moving.
could prepare some money. How about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, listen. Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So,
It's very traumatic. We understand. I mean, I also have my family back in the United States, and I'm constantly trying to send messages to get them to come here. At the same time, I understand that everybody has their reasons and they have their situation, their family. Some people are really stuck. Some people aren't really stuck. Some people, but I feel that it's it's an obligation to keep on dripping in the message, to keep on encouraging, to keep on reminding, and to keep on supporting in whatever way possible. One day, if it can help somebody to make a little bit of preparation a month earlier or a year earlier, and to be able to have a more comfortable transition when the time does come. So I think it's a mitzvah. It's something that constantly has to be said. And of course, there's a lot of potential for judgmentalism and preaching and telling people you're a sinner and you got to move to Israel, all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be. It has to be a supportive message, and it has to be something that understands. On the one hand, everybody's got a hard situation. On the other hand, we just, we don't want it to get harder. We want the best possible outcome for everybody. And, sometimes that means looking at history, learning the lessons, looking at things in the face. We don't want to name a thing, because when we name a thing in our mind, that means that we're going to have to take responsibility and do something. We all have that in some area in our life, except for those of us who are complete tzaddikim. So there's what, somebody called cognitive dissonance or whatever it is. It's a dissonance, and it means that our mechanism, our defense mechanism for not doing things is not naming things in our mind. And what harm can come from naming things truthfully? It puts thinking clearly is far superior to decision making than fuzzy thinking.
Yeah.
And so that's I think is a mitzvah. We have to help people.
I'll mention. I mentioned that I went to the Aliyah conference when I was in Israel. This is like a week ago, and the vibe that I get from a lot of the people that speak about galvanizing the people to make Aliyah. Frank and I call it the let them eat cake scenario, meaning they say make Aliyah, make Aliyah, make Aliyah, make Aliyah. It's an emergency, but they don't. They just say like, well, just come to Israel and you'll figure it out, that kind of thing. And, that is good. I'll say, honestly, that idea is good enough for me, the single guy with, nothing to gain, nothing to lose, nothing, nothing here, nothing there, even though I have a business, whatever, but it's not good enough for entire families that have entire lives. And you gotta give people something, and you can't talk down to them. You can't, like, there's a guy, I'm not going to say his name. He's on Facebook, right? He's a good guy. He actually organized this conference, but he's always like making fun of people for living in Boca and living in LA and living here and living there. Dude, you're not going to get people to make Aliyah by literally insulting them. You're not going to do it. Maybe a couple of people here and there get your jokes, but you're not going to accomplish your mission.
No, because the people that are, part of the get people to make Aliyah thing are not. They're in La. They really are in La.
I know they are in La La. I know.
Because I'm the kind of person. I just wanted. Maybe I never mentioned this to you. Certainly not to you, Mordechai. I would live in a tent.
Yeah.
I would
Same.
Living in a refugee camp.
Same.
Somewhere on the land of Israel. As long as you can cook your food and hook up your phone or whatever. That exists now. You can have like solar panel tents and whatever. Okay. If the land was secure. But you have animals roaming, beasts, creatures. The government didn't do the minimal. Its minimal job is to secure the land, the security of the people. Okay, where you can't even have a picnic in safety. Okay, your daughter can't take a walk in the Jerusalem Park forest, being murdered and raped and stabbed. Okay, all at the same time. Okay, so they're losers. The government, the political class of Israel are losers on purpose. Since the beginning of look, this is what I wish people would understand. Jews and non-Jews who are nice, okay? The Jews that live on the land of Israel right now were not brought there by the stupid political class of Israel. Never. That was a two completely separate phenomena, okay? Where the people who the political class of Israel descended from, right, in Europe, were people who actively tried to interfere as much as possible with Jews migrating to Israel, okay? when there was a critical amount of Jews in Israel. You have religious, people fleeing persecutions. You have religious pilgrims. It was growing for 300 years since the 1700s. It started picking up pace. So the amount of people that would have ended up in Israel would have been more had not the Ben Gurions and all the Turks, decided to form the state. And since they formed the state, they have methodically, with surgeon-like precision, made the situation so miserable that to discourage Jews from coming there as much as possible. They are the final roadblock. The Israeli political class is the final roadblock. It's the final obstacle for Jews moving to Israel, because it's so clear how the decisions they make no rational sense for a government when it's taking care of its people. It's always the opposite. They never do anything to benefit the Jews of Israel. Never. So
it's a big mix. Yep. Sorry, what were we about to say?
Sorry, Mordechai.
We all get agitated from time to time. Well, I think we can agree. What can we can wrap up? We can agree that bad information is bad for you. Just like junk food causes tooth decay, so junk news causes mind decay, and we don't want mind decay. And we agree that it's a positive value to move to Israel, but there have to be mechanisms, there has to be information, and there has to be compassion most of all to help people to come here in these times, which are very scary. And most of all, we got to recenter and refocus ourselves on words that have more timeless value than the words of news sites and media. And that's the words of Chazal, who knew about this political situation a long, long time ago and told us that we don't have anything to fear. So we just got to hold on. So I think that's a good kind of wrap up for the talk. If anyone wants to say anything else.
Yeah, we got to in other words, we got to make the losers walk the plank. That's it.
Yeah. That's it.
I just want to say that, like you said, Frank, I think it's a fantastic thing that, people ask me like, why are you posting about how, Obama is against Israel and how the current administration is basically Obama doing this and doing that, and my answer is not that I believe that any president can help one way or the other. My whole thing is that I'm trying to just get Jews here in America, even if they're right-wing Jews, to understand that the only one we can rely on is Hashem. And there are, there's like these people, American Jews who up until now have been voting for Democrats. Some of those people are waking up, but I don't want them to wake up to vote for Republicans. I want them just to wake up in general and realize nobody's going to help you. Trump, yeah, there's no such thing as Republican. Trump is one guy. Yeah, he can do, even if he gets back in, he can do a couple of things here and there. And this is for, it's like my father likes to say, it's for him. It's not for us. It's for him. It's for his merits. It's for him, Hashem, to help him personally. And the rest of the,
for Trump to become the president. Like, in order for Trump to be able to get over this corrupt voting system, Mashiach has to come and correct the world.
Listen, man, even if he wins, a lot of people are saying, I think our friend Pam Popper said, he's going to overwhelm the cheating. The people, the amount of people that are going to vote, they're going to overwhelm the cheating. But you know how many people in Israel, I was just friends of mine have said they're really concerned that there's probably either going to be, I had one friend tell me there's going to be a balkanization of America, like a natural organic balkanization, just in regions and also within states and themselves, and or at worst there's going to be a civil war, because they're just not going to, I had one friend tell me they're not physically going to let him just literally enter the White House, like take office or being inaugurated. That's what he thinks. I'm like, that's not so out of the,
No, they will burn America's cities before they allow Trump to come back into power.
Of course.
That's what they were preparing for last.
Yep.
Mordechai, before we get off, I wanted to ask you a question. I need to test the waters with you. How do you feel about, the UFO stories in the news? I just I don't know if you've even noticed them or paid it. Since 2017, all these military pilots and all this kind of stuff, telling them about stuff that they've seen. You don't need to
Yeah.
answer. You don't feel like talking about.
No, for a long time there have been these military spokesmen who come out and they talk about the things that they've seen and the files they've seen and the classified information they're going to come out and all this. I just think that it's interesting that whenever there's a UFO, it's always somebody else who saw it and not me who saw it. But yeah,
The cases that I'm talking about, I was forced into
Yeah.
this. I had to write a paper in school, like 2010.
Mm.
But cases that I'm talking about were first-hand, high-level military people, right?
yeah, sure.
Robert Salas, who saw the UFOs and shut off the nuclear missiles that he was a nuclear missile launch officer. This happened in Malmstrom, Montana, in '67, and all these kind of cases. And
Yeah.
to me, we'll talk about it next time if you want, but that's very much related to what was going on in the Midrash that we discussed earlier. But we'll save that for another time.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about another time. We can have a lot of things. I just think I know what Chazal say. Arotza l'shaker yarchi gedo. Someone who wants to lie, so he'll distance his witnesses. He'll make his witnesses be somebody far away that you can't check it out. You know, and these government guys, they all have these classified files that, if you knew what they saw, sure, they were going to launch a nuclear missile at a UFO. Yeah, sure. I believe it. Sure. That was sarcastic. Don't quote me on that. Don't take me out of context on that one.
I'll leave you with this. If those UFO stories are real and it's not some kind of psyop, then it's interesting because, like we said, we don't have a real leader in America, and we don't have leadership in Israel among the Jews at all. And so there's no leadership. And then you have these supernatural things that these military pilots, specifically American military pilots, the mightiest military, right? And they're describing how these things are shutting down their equipment and flying circles around them, in a sense, demonstrating their dominance and showing them, look how weak you are. You're nothing, you're insignificant. You have no power. So we know that Mashiach comes and he dominates the powers of the earth, right? Like, in a kind of a supernatural way. I'm wondering if there's a connection. That's all.
We'll get into it. Science and Torah.
Yeah.
Suspending the laws of physics and Mashiach.
Yep.
Well, I suppose let's thank everyone for joining us, and I have enjoyed very much episode 2 of our fellowship, and looking forward to being on with you guys again.
B'ezrat Hashem. Thank you,
I'll
guys.
be more punctual.
And part of this will be posted for the folks on Instagram and LinkedIn, and make some clips out of this, and should be interesting to see the response.
Have a good night, everyone.
All right. Now that's all.
Thanks.